Welcome to Commander Central, episode 237. And today, it's time to talk about our choices for the Rifties 2020. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris.
How are your top decks treating you guys this week? Everything going okay?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. It's only Monday, though, so we'll see what happens.
but you're on vacation the rest of the week, as am I, so we'll take
True.
that.
Yeah, for sure.
You and I, Max, got to play a little bit. The show is going to go out more than a week after it happened, but we got our Scrap Trawlers games in that we talked a little bit of trash about and previewed and raised almost $700 for No Kids Hungry.
That's right. We raised $670 for No Kid Hungry, so thank you to everybody who donated to that. That's awesome, making sure kids get meals around the calendar year here.
And we had some really good games. We played with Zendikar, original Zendikar, block commanders only we to choose from. So there was only 14 or 15 that were allowed, given that Emrakul's banned and Iona's banned. So who did you wind up choosing, Max?
I ended up choosing original Draina. So that's the 4/4 with flying, and you can pay X black to give it a target creature -0/-X and Drana +X/+0.
And you played Vampire Tribals deck.
I did. I went low to the ground, cost effective, and it seemed to work out okay.
Yeah, because you won the second game, I believe.
I did. And who did you end up playing, Dana?
I played a Rexiel, the Risen Deep, which is the only multicolor commander that was available, Dimir colors, and I played Rexiel Voltron.
Yeah, you did.
Which, I didn't win. I finished number 2 in both games we played. But I took a few people out. It was the deck played fairly well, all things considered, because Rexiel has Swamp Walk and Island Walk, so I had multiple things in the deck that gave other people islands or swamps, and was able to poke through for good damage. So couldn't quite close out either of the two, but I took multiple people out. That was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And we're gonna do we decide which deck we're giving away where yet?
I believe your deck was given away on stream, and my Draina deck will be given away on this show, and we will announce that sometime in January, since our rematch is in February.
Yeah, we've already matched with them, so we'll do the specifics of that next month and give away Max's Vampire deck. So that was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot to Scrap Trawlers for having us on, and thanks for everybody who participated and helped give some money to a really good cause. We appreciate it. Max, I think you got to play some games last weekend as well with some patron supporters on webcam, basically all night Saturday night.
I did. I had plans to play with some local people over webcam later in the evening, so I just kind of hopped into our Slack and said, hey, I'm available to play starting around like 4 o'clock, and all of a sudden it was 1 a.m. So yeah, it was a great 8+ hours of EDH. I got to see a lot of cool decks, got to play some decks that I don't typically play so often, so that was kind of fun to shake off the rust, especially when Brago is concerned. That was fun to play.
Nice. Glad to hear that. I was up fairly late that night doing some work stuff that I finally wrapped up, so I'm kind of hoping I can play some more webcam games in the next coming weeks as I've cleaned up my real-life schedule a little bit, so looking forward to that. If you out there in listener land would like to reach out to us and say hello or wish us happy holidays or talk about some fun games you played, how would you go about doing that, Chris?
You can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us online at cmdrcentral.com, and you can also find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central.
You can also head over to patreon.com/CMDR Central and check out our reward tiers, such as the Decks You Play series, guesting on the show, or just jumping into our chat room to chat with us and all the other members of our community.
Yeah, any support we can get, even if it's just clicking like on our podcast or videos on YouTube, any kind of engagement at all means a lot. So we thank everyone out there, whether you're a patron supporter or you are just a listener. Anything and everything makes a big difference. So thank you all very much. This, I think, is the last show we're going to have of this year, I believe.
I believe it is. That's weird to say. After this long year, that felt like a decade.
Yeah. And we're hopeful 2021 is going to be a little bit better. I think everyone's looking forward. We're recording this on the darkest day of the year, technically. So today is the solstice. So hopefully that means every day moving forward it gets a little bit lighter. I'm not going to apply too much metaphorical value to that, but kind of hoping it goes that way. But every year since we've been doing this show, we've done this Rifties awards thing. The first first year just kind of for a fun thing, and then people liked it, so we've just kept doing it, or we give our picks for the best cards of the year in each category. But one thing we've never quite done is like defined what our criteria are for choosing this. So the first thing here we'll mention is just kind of what the group criteria is and the qualifications for a card to qualify for this. Not to keep using the word qualify over and over. It has to be a new card in 2020, and it has to be a card who's good in Commander. So like that's the two primary criteria here is brand new card and how well it performs in Commander. Beyond that, though, we might each be choosing for slightly different reasons. It says that there's no like hard and fast rules for this. So I thought maybe first we would kind of just briefly talk about what our own personal thought processes were. Max, why don't you quick describe what yours are and what kind of your criteria are for picking a card?
Yeah, so what I did is I kind of make my choices for my top 3 or whatever I do per category based on kind of 3 criteria. The first being, has the card made an impression in a game enough times for me to remember it, whether I'm casting it, I see an opponent cast it, how many times did I see that card in a game all year long? The second is it just a good card in EDH that maybe I don't see because of a dollar value or, limited product? Or maybe I do see it all the time because it's that good. We'll say like Heroic Intervention from a couple years ago. And finally, is it something interesting? And I kind of define interesting as, is it a returning mechanic? Did they start a new cycle? Did they complete a cycle? So kind of the EDH hopeful in me of like, what are things we're missing? Does it fall into that category as well?
Okay. How about you, Chris? What are you thinking about when you're picking these cards?
Are they good?
Are they good? Okay. No, but like I get that. Like sometimes it's just nebulous, and you're just kind of going by the feel.
Yes.
Like it's more art than science, and that's what it is for you. You're just like, this feels right.
Yeah, it's also, cards that are overlooked. There's a couple of them that I chose this year that I figured were overlooked due to certain factors of how people are now playing the game compared to how it was played, 20 years ago.
Okay. For me, I'm looking for a card to be good, so I'm doing the same thing there. The one thing, though, I think that matters a little bit is I also am looking for a card to be broadly good. And an example I'll use, since I've talked about it on Twitter a little bit, is Skyclave Apparition, which has done huge numbers in other formats, showed up in Modern and in Legacy and Vintage as well, I believe. Definitely in Pioneer. And it's a good card in Commander, too. But it's not a great card in Commander. Like, it's good in other formats, kind of like Tarmogoyf is. And it's not like Tarmogoyf. I mean, Tarmogoyf maybe is a bad card. That for me isn't the best example, but in Commander. But Skyclave Apparition, as decent as it is in Commander, there's a lot of decks I myself run that just don't want it. Like, I'm not using recursion. I don't have the decks themselves don't care about the fact that it's on a body, versus something like, say, Smothering Tithe from a few years ago, where it doesn't matter what your deck did. If you're playing, a really casual mono white deck, or you're playing a really good mono white deck, like a Heliod combo deck, if you're playing a 3-color deck, if you're playing a 5-color Slivers deck, it doesn't matter. Smothering Tithe is a really good card in every one of those decks. So I was looking for things that weren't just amazing in some specific set of circumstances. Skyclave Apparition is really good in a Blink deck or something. If you're not playing a Blink deck and you have access to other colors, it's probably not something you're considering. I was trying to think of cards that, generally speaking, are really good in most situations. So that's one of the things I was looking at, and I thought we should at least kind of throw out there what our thought processes were before we kind of get into some of these cards. So first things first, let's just jump into the instance. And I'll start with Max again. Max, what are your picks for the instance of the year?
So I have 3 choices for the instance of the year, and my winner is kind of a group of them.
Okay.
So my choices are Malakir's Rebirth, which is a 1-mana black instant that when target creature dies, you pay 2 life and it comes back to the battlefield. Really cool recursion spell. It's also a land on the backside in case you need that.
Mm-hmm.
My second nomination would be Akroma's Will from Commander Legends. 4 mana. If you control your commander, choose both. All the keywords for all your creatures. And my third choice is the free spell cycle from Commander 2020. So that includes Flawless Maneuver, Deflecting Swat, Fierce Guardianship, Deadly Rollick, and the green one. Which is a fog. I have seen them all. In games. So based on that, my choice for best instant of the year is the free cycle from Commander 2020.
Okay, because even though they do different things, they are almost all really good. Deflecting SWAT, Fierce Guardianship in particular, are phenomenal cards. But the worst of the 5 is still a really good card.
Right.
So okay, you're lumping those into a cycle. I buy that. The free cycle from Commander 2020. Chris, what do you have here?
Well, of course, Achroma's Will is probably the best card ever printed.
Man, it's really good.
Yeah. But I dug a little bit deeper, and in digging deeper, I found a card that I honestly did not realize existed, due to the simple fact that this set came out right around the time that COVID hit, right around the time, when people weren't really playing. I wasn't paying too much about, attention to it because the world was going into the crapper and we didn't know what was going on. So this wonderful card is a 2-mana instant from Ikoria called Ram Through. It's 1 colorless and a green. It reads, target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Cool beans, whatever, another green fight clause. But it also reads that if this creature you control has trample, excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. This card to me leapt out at me saying, this is the green removal spell. 90% of the time your creatures are big, they have trample. Let's smoke a token for, 1 damage and trample over for 9 with the rest of the trample and hit the player as well. I mean, for me, this screamed out perfect for what green was looking for.
And then swing through with the creature.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's effectively a damage doubler for the most part in green on a stick. Not on a stick, but on a spell. Yep. This got cast in our game with Scrap Trawlers last night.
It did.
So we did just see it. And actually, I believe I had to counter it.
Yeah,
you did.
It is a very good card. I was surprised, when I was doing the dig dive, the big dive through everything, that this card existed. I was like, wow, finally a fight card that could be playable in Commander, that's not stapled on something where you can continuously fight every turn.
Right. Yeah, it's a really, really solid card, and it's one I don't think we talked about at the time, but I've seen it played not just last night, but I've seen it played multiple times since it came out. And you're right, a bunch of the stuff from Ikoria kind of got lost in reality, essentially.
Yeah, that's true.
Instant was really tough. I had a tough time making a pick here. The free spell cycle that Max picked just as a cycle, Fierce Guardianship is amazing. Deflecting SWAT, Flawless Maneuver, especially those 3. Achroma's Will is obviously really good. There was a few other ones I liked a lot. I liked Unleash Fury, that is just an instant speed, double a creature's power. Valakut Awakening is a one-sided wheel, effectively, and it puts the cards in the bottom of your library, which is really, really useful too. I didn't take the full free cycle like Max did, because I just felt like Fierce Guardianship is so good. And the rest are really good, but Fierce Guardianship is amazing. I mean, if you're playing blue and you at all care about your commander, it's just a card assuming you can get one, and assuming you don't mind paying the $40 or whatever it is, it's as close is to a quote-unquote staple as I think we got this year. Just a brutally effective card, and I felt like it was head and shoulders enough among the rest that I singled it out specifically as one card. So I went with Fierce Guardianship there. Why don't we throw it back to Chris here for his selections among the sorceries?
So sorceries I had a tough time with. There are quite a few good ones, but I'm going to pick a card, and I'm assuming this is on everyone's list, because this card pretty much did everything that everyone's been hoping for. It broke the cycle of, nullness and, added something to a color that they needed to have, and that was Feed the Swarm. Everyone should know what Feed the Swarm is. If you don't, it's a 2-mana, 1 colorless and a black sorcery that allows you to destroy target creature enchantment, and, that an opponent controls, obviously, because you don't want to destroy your own stuff. But you lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. This card fits that role perfectly of what you were looking for, and it allows mono black to go just a step farther into the game, and hopefully in the future we see more of this stuff.
That's a really good pick. I think it was one I had on my short list for sure. I've put it in, I think I put it in 2 decks. And the only reason I didn't put in a third one is after staring at the list for an hour and a half, I'm like, I just can't find room for it right now. I'll just deal with it later. And I've never been able to go back and do it. But if you're in Rakdos or Mono Black or Dimir, it's really, really good. I mean, being able to deal with an enchantment or a creature, it's not even like it's limited to just enchantments. There's always going to be a target for this. 2 mana is very, very efficient, and the amount of life you lose is usually not that big of a deal. So,
yeah,
really, really good pick. I'm totally on board with this. Max, what do you have for us?
So this was actually the easiest category for me to do. When we talked about doing the Rifties, my mind instantly, when I got to sorceries, I actually had to find more to make a list, essentially. This is the first card that came to mind, and I knew it was going to win for me.
Yep.
But the rest of my list, I'll start with that, So Dismantling Wave is a 3 mana, 2 and a white sorcery. For each opponent, destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment that player controls, but you can cycle it for 6 and double white to destroy all artifacts and enchantments. My second one is Jeska's Will from Commander Legends. Another one of the will cycles, if you control your commander, do both. You can either add a red for each card in target opponent's hand, or you exile the top 3 cards of your library and you may play them this turn. And my other one on my list was Wheel of Misfortune.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
I put this on my list just because for all the hoops you sort of have to jump through, it is still a 3 mana wheel most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So just the pure availability part for new players is kind of why I put this on the list. But my favorite sorcery, and what I think is the best sorcery of the year, is Eerie Ultimatum. This was from Ikoria. It is double white, triple black, double green, and you may return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. I have been crushed by this card every time it's ever been cast, and it is the one card that will forever be burned into my brain of if I ever play Abzan, this is the card that gets put in the deck first before my commander. So this wins best sorcery for me.
Unless you're playing like Abzan Rats or Abzan Shadowborn Apostles, it just reads return every permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree if I was playing those 3 colors or possibly a 5-color deck or a 4-color deck with the 3 colors. Even though there's triple black in the casting cost, by the time you get to that point in the game, you usually can do that. It's just so good and should end the game.
Right.
In theory.
So, yeah, I mean, and people can respond to it. They can, pop a scavenger grounds in response or something, but like you're going to be aware of that and not cast it. So unless they have an instant trick, you're probably going to pull off something huge with it, and it's a really, really good spell. Yep, I like that one as well. There was a few I looked at, and you guys mentioned them. Feed the Swarm was on my list. The Ultimatums are on my list. Dismantling Wave. I think the one that nobody said was Balaged Recovery, which is just the regrowth in the back of the land.
Max doesn't like that card, though. We discussed this last week.
I like it a lot. I think I put it in most of, if not all of my green decks. And it's just one of those things where, like, it's super easy to analyze how effective it is. It's a land that comes into play tapped early, and it's a regrowth late, and the amount of times the land coming into play tapped burns me is way less the amount of time having a regrowth with almost no cost on it because it's on the back of a land card. Late is useful. It's just, of all the MDFC spells, it was the easiest one I thought to evaluate when it was first spoiled, and it's just wound up playing exactly that way. Not very flashy, not very exciting, but just a really good producer. But Jeska's Will. I've been raving about the card, and nothing has changed. I will admit, part of I might be slightly biased here. The deck I'm running it in has a lot of copy effects in it.
It fits so well.
So what has wound up happening multiple times with Jeska's Will is, like, I'll cast it and someone will have 6 or 7 cards in hand, so I will exile 3 cards and make 6 mana, and then it's copied, so effectively I've got like 6 cards exiled and 12 mana in my pool, and then one of the cards is a recursion card from my graveyard where I'll recur Jeska's Will and then copy it with one of the cards that also got exiled. So now I've got like 30 mana in my mana pool and a dozen cards exiled that I can cast from, and it like just seems to just spiral out of control. But the worst case scenario is it's still a pretty decent draw spell in red, or it's a pretty decent ritual in red, very often both. So I feel like the ceiling on it's really, really high, or the floor is really, really high, and the ceiling is just up near the moon. So yes, it's a card that's performed spectacularly for me in every deck it's in. And this definitely feels like one of those ones as well where I'm for sure running it in mono red, but if I'm playing like some kind of a 5-color deck, I don't know why I still wouldn't consider it there. It's still a really good value piece. So that hit all the beats for me, and Jeska's Will is what I am going to go with. We will jump on down to artifacts now, and I can start this one off because my picks are super boring.
There weren't a lot to choose from. Let's be fair, if we eliminate the creature artifacts, there weren't many to choose from.
No. And usually this is only an exciting category if it's like an artifact year where we have like a Kaladesh or something, because you're right, sets tend to have a limited amount of artifacts in them, and half of them are just like boring, mana lift level fixing rocks for draft kind of environments, so you have much less opportunity for cool cards among the artifacts. Kind of the two I will mention as runner-ups here are the Ozolith and Shadow Spear. Shadow Spear is fantastic in any kind of equipment deck, and it's just pretty good in general. The Ozolith is busted. It's straight up busted if you're playing a +1 counters deck, or basically a deck that cares about moving around counters in any way, shape, or form. But I felt like both of those were like a little bit limited roles. I mean, if you're not playing +1 counters, you don't care about the Ozolith. If you're not doing some kind of a Voltron thing, you probably don't care about the Shadow Spear. Compared to Soul Guide Lantern, which is extremely boring. It's just a slightly better Nihil Spellbomb for the most part, but you need to have some way to deal with graveyards, and it's probably just the most efficient way to do that. It can go in any deck. It can solve problems. If you don't need it, you can just draw a card off it. It's just really, really simple and does the thing it does, probably slightly better than all the other cheap graveyard fighting artifacts that are out there. So it's a completely dull pick. It's like the, best shingles for your house of the year. And this brand of shingles is slightly better. This Soul Guide Lantern is the best snow tire, or it's utterly unexciting, but hey, you need snow tires too. So that's my pick there. What do you have for us, Chris?
For my pick, I went back, now like I was saying, back to like the early aspects of the game. Like when we first started playing, you had the child mind,
Sure.
Everything's awesome. This is all cool. I want to play these bad cards. And this card, I don't consider it bad, but I don't consider it good at the same time. But it fits the aspect of now you can play any bad card you want. And that card is Chromatic Orrery. So for 7 mana, you get a legendary artifact. This came out of Core Set 21. It says that you may spend mana or mana of any color. It also taps for 5 colorless mana, which is 5 mana of any color. For 5 mana, you can also tap it and draw a card for each color among permanents you control. So now this just fits your 5-color deck. You play anything you want. Have fun as a kid again. I mean, perfect. It fit every criteria that I was looking for in a card to actually enjoy the game and not fine-tune your deck, which is what we've been doing, everyone's been doing lately,
Sure,
it kind of seems like you're pulling away from the fun aspect of the game.
If you are looking for a artifact card that puts a smile on your face when you're playing it, that is it. It does dumb, big, splashy, shiny stuff. Yep, that is a perfect example of that. Yeah, for sure.
Now, the other way I look at this card is it is extremely efficient in what it is, too. It may cost 7 mana, but it creates 5 mana in the long run.
Yeah.
So pretty much you're paying 2 mana for a mana, for an artifact that lets you, your lands tap for any color. So that's the way I look at it as it sits.
Okay, Max, what do you have here for us?
I, like you, Dana, have some pretty boring selections. My selections come down to Witch's Cauldron, which is an artifact that you can pay 1 and a black to sacrifice a creature to gain a life and draw a card. I also have Lithoform Engine, which lets you copy a permanent spell or copy a bunch of other spells for different amounts of mana. And my choice for Artifact of the Year is actually one you discussed, Dana, and that is Shadow Spear. This 1 mana art equipment that equips for 2, given any creature trample and lifelink is a lot. I've been hurt by this card too many times to count, so I think that's what made it my Artifact of the Year.
Have a tough time arguing with that, other than my argument about being broadly useful. But if you're talking about something that's just an absolute dagger in someone's heart, for strong cards, Shadow Spear is fantastic.
Yeah, I was quite disappointed going back through the artifacts for the year. There really wasn't much. I mean, once you cut out all the reprints, granted, there were a lot of good reprints.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Once you cut them all, cut all those out, it was there really wasn't too many new, really good cards.
I mean, Theros had an emphasis on enchantments. Ikoria was a creature set. None of not Double Masters, none of the Jumpstart kits individually were really artifact focused. Zendikar is always a lands-focused set, so we just didn't get anything that had even an artifact or even an equipment sub-theme, really, aside from a couple of the cards in Commander Legends that were creatures, but there even wasn't specifically brand new support cards for them necessarily. So yeah, it was a very quiet year for artifacts, for sure. However, as I just mentioned, we did get one set that was kind of enchantment-based, and enchantments tend to show up in numbers a little bit larger than artifacts in general anyway. So let's jump over here to enchantment enchantments. And Max, what do you have for enchantments? Start us off here.
So I have 4 on my list, and I'll just go up until the one that I think is the enchantment of the year. So my first one is Teferi's Ageless Insight. It's 2 and 2 blue, and if you were to draw a card except the first one in your draw step, draw 2 instead. That's just good. I like card draw. It's like a Hallmark's Archive, but on an enchantment for a little less mana.
Well, and there's a limited amount of decks that care about both halves of Alheimer's Archive. Most of them just want one or the other. So if you're, particularly if you're playing blue, for the most part, all you care about is the card draw portion of it. And this is cheaper. And it adds to devotion or something if that matters to you as well. So yeah, no, that was a really good card.
My second thing on the list is a cycle, or more additions to a cycle. And I'm choosing the Shrines from Magic Core Set 2021. Solely on the fact that there's more shrines now. We aren't just stuck to the 5 from the Kamigawa set. Now we have 5 plus 6 is 11 shrines. So I still don't know how much you can do with them, but there's more of them. And I always like more of something very specific for EDH.
Yeah, I agree. Specific and fun, and none of them are backbreaking, but like it gives people something fun to build. You know, people have dabbled in Shrine decks before, and at 11, they're like, they can actually do it. That made people happy, and that's always cool.
Right. My next one is Court of Grace. This is from the Court cycle out of Commander Legends. It enters, you become the Monarch, and then at your upkeep, you either make a 1/1 Flying Spirit token, or if you're the Monarch, you make a 4/4 Angel creature token with flying. But my enchantment of the year is going to be Fiery Emancipation.
Nice.
This is 3 and 3 red for an enchantment from Core Set 2021. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to permanent or player instead. It's just a fun card for all those red decks or Chandra tribal decks or direct damage type decks. It's a fun card. It's something you need to take care of right away, so it really speeds the game up and makes the game very interesting as you keep playing around with it if it lasts for more than a spin around the table.
Joey and Matt always tease me about this card because I actually played in decks, but when we reviewed it, I was kind of like, here's what I said. I was like, oh, it's just gratuitous violence for the most part. Like if you're gonna kill people, you're gonna kill them, which I still don't think is wrong. I think like if you're swinging in and you've got double damage, triple damage is gonna obviously gonna kill them, but like double damage probably will too. It's just at some point it becomes irrelevant. It does 10 times as much damage. Well, okay, the difference between 3 and 10 isn't, it's still gonna kill people. The difference between 2 and 3 is still gonna kind of kill people, but it's so it wasn't like I was like saying it wasn't good. I was just kind of saying it was kind of just another copy of a card that exists. But it's great. It's a really good card, and I have it in 3 different decks, I think, or at least 2 different decks. So I'm certainly on board with it being a really good card. How about you, Chris? What do you have here?
Well, let's see here now. I have 5 cards, It's my ambition to go through this bounty in life, be cunning and graceful and with not full of ire. It is the Court cycle by far. I looked at all the enchantments, and these ones stuck out at me just due to the simple fact of they are specifically designed for the format that we play.
Yes.
That Monarch is amazing, and I love how they brought it back. They're integrating it into all the colors easier. And now, while 2 of these cards I think are trash, the other 3 are really good. So we'll just leave it at that and just let it go because someone's going to harass me about them.
And even the 2 that I think aren't quite as good are still good and really good in like specific decks.
Yes.
So yeah. None of them are like those ones where you're like, man, the green and the blue and the black one are great and the white one's lousy at all times. The white one gains you 2 life or something terrible. Like every single one of these is really, really good at the very least in some specific circumstances. And some of them are good all the time. So
indeed.
And I agree. It also hit that thing you were talking about, Chris, where it's just fun and makes you feel like you're a kid playing the game again.
Yeah, I mean, it actually brings interaction to the table more now instead of, I blow up your thing, I blow up your thing. Now it's like, now we have the Monarch floating around. So now everyone's like, ooh, Monarch. And now we're going to wheel and deal with you. And because I want the Monarch and just let me be the Monarch for a turn. And
so I had a couple here I considered. Branching Evolution kind of didn't get talked about very much. Although it's a $12 card because, everything a Jumpstart is. And that's the one that when you put counters on a thing, you put twice as many of those +1 counters instead. So it's the half of doubling season that you don't get from Parallel Lives.
Yep.
But if you're playing a +1 counters deck, that's fantastic. But if you're not, it doesn't do you much good. So like I was looking for broad cards. I don't know if that quite fit. Garruk's Uprising, that draws you a card when a big creature comes into play, and it gives your creatures trample, and it draws a card when itself comes into play, is super good in a lot of green decks. But like if you're playing elves, it probably doesn't necessarily help you. So that was maybe a knock against it. Underworld Breach is a legitimately broken card in multiple formats. But I feel like in Commander, your graveyard's a little more vulnerable. And I also feel like in Commander, for whatever reason, the way Commander works, there's other good red graveyard recursion options too that make it maybe not always like, for example, in my Izzet deck, the Finale is a better graveyard recursion card than Underworld Breach is, or Mizzix's Mastery is a better recursion card for what I'm doing in Underworld Breach.
Yep.
Not that it isn't really good, like even if you only get one thing back from it, a red regrowth is still pretty good. So it's a really great card, but I also felt like it was a little bit limited maybe. So I'm picking Valakut Exploration.
Oh.
That's the 3-mana enchantment with a landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card as long as it remains exiled. And at the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with it, put them in an owner's graveyard, and then it deals that much damage to each opponent. So it's a kind of a Phyrexian Arena-ish effect in red. Why I picked this was, number one, if you're in a landfall deck, it's insane, because it's basically a self-feeding engine where you're, playing fetches and getting multiple cards that might be more fetches that you can play with your multiple landfalls that turn, and you finish the turn off by, nailing people for 4 or 5 or something. But even if you're not playing that kind of deck, it's mono red is usually hurting for card draw, and you're almost always going to be, playing a land most turns, so you've got a pretty good piece of tech there. If you're playing a 3 or 4 or 5 color deck, oftentimes you are playing a bunch of fetch lands anyway, just because you're in a multicolor deck and you need the fixing. So there you could be getting, without even doing landfall stuff, just accidentally getting multiple triggers per turn. If you're playing Gruul, where you have access to green and you're probably just running a bunch of green ramp anyway, even without trying to do landfall stuff, that's going to be multiple cards per turn. I just felt like this is an enchantment that in kind of the broadest swath of decks is going to wind up being effective. Everybody wants to draw cards no matter what you're doing. Everyone plays lands no matter what you're doing. I think it's just probably the most broadly effective card. And when it's fantastic, it's fantastic. And it also feels really fun to play that land and exile the card that's another land that you can play that turn because you're, playing some kind of a landfall effect, giving you multiple lands, which you crack as a fetch land to get another land. And it's like a little mini game. And that's a lot of fun in addition to being powerful. So
just see how many times you can do it.
Absolutely. And then deal damage to everybody after you do all your stuff when the cards go into your graveyard, in which case perhaps they're ones that you can reuse from your graveyard.
With Balagad Recovery.
Sorry, from your it's just a cool card.
Love you, Max.
I heard that, Chris. I heard that.
Okay, so I think we have another not that exciting one here, but Max, how about the lands? What are your picks here?
All of my picks come from Commander Legends.
Okay.
I think all of ours probably do.
Yep.
So I have Guildless Commons, which is the colorless bounce land.
Mm-hmm.
I have War Room, and I have the Enemy Battle Bond Cycle, which came out in the Commander Legends. And I'm gonna have to go with those just because we completed a land cycle, which might be the first time in a very long time of me playing Magic where they started and completed a new
Right.
cycle of cards.
How about you, Chris? What are your picks here?
Well, War Room's just the best land ever printed, period. Aside from that, I like the Battle Bond lands a lot. The other lands, I'm actually currently trying to look this up, but I do believe that they came from Zendikar or Theros. The flipping, basically they're basic lands. I found them.
Zendikar.
Yep, I found them very intriguing due to the simple fact of they're actually 2 lands in one, but you have the choice of choosing which one you're going to actually play. And I actually just picked these up for my Alesha deck as I'm redoing it, because I'm like, you know what, I'm going to try this. And I got the fancy full art ones and all that.
Nice.
I'm like, this is going to be sweet.
Ooh.
So I do like the aspect that, with those lands that they're trying to do new stuff with the game, to make the game more fun.
Yeah, there was a lot to look at here. It's easy to forget Nesting Grounds was a pretty good card from back in Ikoria. Not Ikoria. Yeah, Ikoria. If you're playing with counters and want to move stuff around. And it works on Planeswalkers too. So there's some useful, it's a useful piece of tech in some decks. We got 3 cycles of duels this year effectively, or even, I could technically tri-lands with the Triomes. We got the MDFC cards that Chris talked about, the dual face ones and Zendikar Rising. We got the Triome cycle in Ikoria that are basically lands that do 3 colors. And they can cycle, and they're fetchable because they have the basic land types.
Yeah, I totally spaced those. As soon as you brought them up, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember those now.
and of course, we finished the Battle Bond cycle. I will note this, like, we usually get a new land cycle most years, but for the most part, it winds up being, I think one of them is one you can kind of dismiss. Like, you're like, well, the Amonkhet cyclers are nice because you can fetch them, but they always come into play tapped. And you're like, yeah, it's fine. Or like the Shadows over Innistrad lands that were okay for like, basically a month till the next cycle came out. You know, the fast lands we got in Kaladesh were nice if you play other formats, but in EDH are not quite as good because, you know, the game's not over in 4 turns, and half of those turns it comes into play untapped, like in Modern. In EDH, a lot of the game they come into play tapped. That's not ideal. I feel like all of the cycles this year, if you're playing a 3-color deck that can run a Triome, you're probably running it. If you can play a deck, you know, people added those Battle Bond lands to the decks that can run them. If you're playing a 2-color deck, those MDFC lands, people added in their deck. I think all those cycles this year are really, really good. However, I will say this. I also think maybe we don't need them at this point. I think there's so many good dual land cycles. While I'm super glad to get the Battle Bond land cycle finished, and I hope they finish more cycles, and I hope our land bases keep getting better, it's not like my decks weren't just fine without them. We have so many good dual lands already that, you know, it doesn't make that much of a notable difference. Whereas being able to just draw a card off a land with War Room has made a difference. Like, that card has changed things in decks. You know, it doesn't do a lot of good in a 5-color deck, but like in a colorless deck or a 1-color deck or a 2-color deck, particularly if you're playing anything that operates at instant speed, and you're like, I'm holding up mana for a counterspell. I didn't need it. Well, I'm just going to draw a card then. It's a perfect little mana sink in a deck that does stuff at instant speed. If you're desperate and need to draw a card, that's a good way to do that. It doesn't really hurt your deck's composition at all, particularly in a 2-color deck or less. So War Room was my pick there for all of those reasons. Okay, we're getting to the end. Non-commander planeswalkers. Not that there's that many commander planeswalkers, but we're trying to... The next 2 categories, planeswalkers and creatures, we're talking about ones in the 99 specifically versus ones that could be commanders. Max, what was your pick here? What did you have for the non-commander planeswalkers you liked the most?
Now, Max, there's only one right choice. So.
Is it Teferi, Master of Time? Because that's what I chose.
Maybe. That's totally what I chose, too.
It's a 4-mana, 2/2 blue for a 3 loyalty Teferi. It has a static ability of you may activate loyalty abilities of Teferi, Master of Time on any player's turn at any time you could cast an instant. And its 3 abilities are +1 to draw a card and discard a card, -3 target creature you don't control phases out, and is -10 it says take 2 extra turns after this one. The ability to just let you tick him up or down for defensive maneuvers on every other player's turn in a multiplayer format makes this card so good. I can't wait to finally draw it in a deck where I can finally use it, because I have yet to draw it, and that's a problem, and I need to solve that in the next, 9 days.
I mean, he comes down at 3, immediately goes to 4 because you filter down for a card, and then goes to 5 and 6 and 7. Like, it comes back to you and he's already at 8 or something, and you've got to dig through 5% of your deck in the meantime. And if you have anything like Teferi's Ageless Insight, you're drawing 2 cards and discarding 1 on everyone's turn. It's just, like, there's almost no situation where you're playing blue and this isn't a good card.
No, it's amazing. Like, I looked through the Planeswalkers, and there were a couple other ones that came out at me, but this one just, like, is leaps and bounds ahead of them.
Yes. The only one I will mention, and it's not a better card at all, I just think it's a really neat design, was Jace Mirror Mage.
Okay.
Because when it's the 3-mana Jace, and it has kicker 2, and when it's kicked, you create a token that's a copy of Jace Mirror Mage, except for it's not legendary. So you cast Jace for 5, basically, and you bring in the Jace Mirror Mage and the copy of it. It's got a +1 where you scry 2, and then a 0 where you draw a card and remove loyalty equal to the card's converted mana cost. So you use probably the token of Jace to do the +1 and scry, and then you use the 0 on the main Jace to draw the card that's going to do minimal damage damage to Jace's loyalty. It's just a neat little interaction where you're like making multiple copies of this Jace, including, if you start copying that token copy, you can get a whole bunch of these out there that kind of interact with one another. It's a really fun design, but I think it's like more fun than good, whereas Teferi's just really, really good.
Yeah, Teferi's...
So,
I
okay,
don't know what went through their mind when they made that card.
So this one's pretty boring because we all picked Teferi, so we might as well move on to non-commander creatures, because unlike non-commander planeswalkers, there's a gazillion creatures to look at here. So, yep. Max, what did you have here for creatures?
I have 4 candidates for this category. The first one being Dream Trawler. It's 2 double white, double blue. For a 3/5 Sphinx with flying and lifelink, whenever you draw a card, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. When it attacks, you draw a card, and you can discard a card for it to gain hexproof until end of turn, but you tap it. This was a standard all-star. I've seen it a lot in EDH, not only just in Dana's Sphinx deck. I've played it in a couple of my decks. I've seen it across the table. It just is a nice creature that draws you cards, and a lot of cards, and by inherently playing the game, it gets bigger. So I really like that about that. My other one is Ancient Green Warden, which is the land Harmonicon. It's a 5/7 with reach for 4 green. You can play lands from your graveyard, and if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. That's a lot of triggers for landfall stuff. And yes. I feel like I would lose track, but it's been fun to see this card kind of go off sometimes. My other one is Nyxbloom Ancient. Whenever you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times that much. Pretty sure it has a keyword on it as well. It's an enchantment elemental. It checks all the boxes for EDH. I talked about it like 4 weeks ago on this show. But my winner for best non-commander creature of 2020 is the one, the only Brash Taunter.
CCO put you up to this, didn't they?
I can't say anything about that. 4 and a red for a 1/1 creature goblin, but it's indestructible, and whenever it is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target opponent, and then you can pay 2 and a red for Brash Taunter to fight another creature. I've always been a fan of Stuffy Doll since I started playing Magic, and I liked Stuffy Doll, but the Brash Taunter is just a little better because you don't have to name an opponent. You can just hit everybody all the time. So there's less loops to jump through, although you have to play red, which I can overlook for this card. So Brash Taunter is my card of the year for creatures, non-legendary creatures.
How about you, Chris?
So I have 2 picked.
Okay.
The one that should be my proper pick is Thassa's Oracle. It's just a phenomenal card. It's played in like every format. It breaks formats. It is what it is. It's a good card. We'll just leave it at that. But my pick for this, and this is to make light of the year, and, I hope everybody got a kick out of it when it came out, because this was not intentional, random fluke that happened.
I think I know what card you're going to pick.
It is Space Godzilla Death Corona. This card it is a horrible card, trash card. I hate the card in general, but the name on it, when I saw this, I was like, okay, Wizards, yeah, I see what you're doing here. That's quite amusing. What are the odds of this? It's a fluke. Haha, I found this card to be a, something that just made the year kind of seem funny to me, just in general.
It was everything about 2020.
Yeah, just
right there in one card.
What are the odds?
That was our warning. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, they had to change the name on it, all that stuff. For me, it's a collector item type of deal. Just a reminder of how, what a weird year we had going on.
That's perfectly reasonable. I get it. Yeah, Max or Chris, sorry, you mentioned the Thassa's Oracle.
Yes.
I kind of had 4 lumped in a group here. Allosaurus, Shepherd, Thassa's Oracle, Hellbreacher, and Opposition Agent. For like really competitive decks are all really good. Or not really good, like downright like warping. They're so good. Like, it's not really the way I play Magic or the tables I sit at. I've not seen any of those cast yet, and it wouldn't surprise me if I don't see any of them cast in the near future, in part because of prices, but in part because that's just not kind of how people play where I play. Max mentioned Nyxbloom Ancient and Ancient Green Warden, both of which are just absolute bombs. I mentioned Skyclave Apparition earlier, which is just a really good card. Luminous Broodmoth was kind of a combo piece that's did a lot of work earlier in the year. But for whatever reason, the card I've seen probably the most this year that's been the biggest threat at tables has been Scoot Swarm.
Really?
And it's obviously, really strong in standard, but like, I've seen it probably half a dozen times come out in decks, and you just have to deal with it. Like, everyone immediately, number one, everyone laughs because it's Scoot Swarm and it's so stupid. But of all the things, everyone's like, oh, Scoot Swarm. And then immediately everyone's like, we got to deal with that because it's going to get out of control. And it happened in our
last
game
night, yeah.
with Scrap Trawlers. The same thing happened where I was like, we got to figure out how to stop it. And then I wound up reanimating it after someone dealt with it. And the same thing happened. We got to deal with that Scoot Swarm. So just because of that, like that reaction, and it goes in a bunch of decks if you're playing tokens, if you're playing landfall, like there's a lot of places it goes as well. It's just a card that people react to. We got to deal with it. And I guess that's true of Nyx Bloom Ancient, too. You have to deal with that or they're making a ton of mana. But for whatever reason, it just feels like Scoot Swarm is such an innocuous-looking card to get people to have that reaction. Maybe it's a little like Brash Taunter is for Max, where it's such a stupid card that winds up being so effective. And it winds up being fun as a result of that, as a result of being like this silly thing that's really, really good that makes it an interesting card in decks as well. So I am going with Scoot Swarm.
It's a good choice. I do like how you said that it always needs to be dealt with because, like the survival or the text on it says, "Survival Rule 782." Yeah. There are always more Scoot bugs.
Yep. Yep, such a cool card. All right, last but not least here, the Commanders. And we can start with you here, Chris.
Easy.
All right.
Omnath. There's no arguing in this one. Super tempting.
Yeah, I get it.
No, it's probably not the best, but for when it comes to Commanders, I always look at them of the simple fact of what they do, and he fills in like all the checks. This is a great lore. He just keeps changing. Every time we see an Omnath, he changes. And this card is played in other formats. Like I remember when it hit standard, the amount of things that I saw on Twitter of people angry about this card. I was just like, oh, wow, really? Yeah, so this is the card that I would pick for the Commander base itself.
And, despite, I'm looking at EDH Rec right now, despite it having came out back in Zendikar Rising, it's the 6th most built Commander in the last week. And the rest, the ones all in front of it are all ones from Commander Legends. So it's Sakashima, Obeka, Arami the Dead Tide, Kadama of the East Tree, and Omnath. It's like the people are still building that deck even right now today, despite it having been out 3 or 4 months compared to the Commander Legends stuff. It's up there with those cards, and all the ones after it are Commander Legends too. So like it's, for whatever reason, Omnath is something that's caught people's attention. And I agree that kind of the story of like he gets more colors every time. People like that. And
yes.
They keep building the deck. It was on my list for sure.
Yeah,
what do you have here, Max?
I'm wondering with Omnath though. The reason that he is, that built with that many different people is due to the 4 colors. Is you don't have to build him off of landfall. You can build him any which way you want. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious if that's the reason behind it.
You have a lot of options with it as well. And it also lets you, it's the first landfall commander really that lets you play with white as well. So there's some other white cards that people have maybe wanted to play over the years and lets you do something a little bit different with landfall. So yeah, it for sure. Max, what do you have?
I have a bunch of choices. I was gonna do a cop out here and just say I couldn't pick because there's like 177 new legendary creatures this year, but I wasn't gonna do that. So my top 5, I'll quickly go over here, are Yearlock of the Scorched Thrash. That's the mana burn commander from Commander Legends.
Yep.
We have Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. All your creatures become forests. Jessica from Commander Legends, the Planeswalker, because it's another Planeswalker that can be your commander, and on top of it, it has partner and has some cool abilities. Winota, Joiner of Forces, just because I think this was the first Boros legend in quite a while that really got everybody excited about Boros in EDH. And I've seen Winota decks, they can go really fast and can do really aggressive attacky things, and I like to attack when I play EDH, so that's why I put it on the list. But my favorite commander from the year is Thales, Reverent Medium from Commander Legends. It's a 3/4 human cleric for 3 and Orzhov, and at the beginning of each end step, create 1/1 Create X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying, where X is the number of tokens you created this turn. I like that this is a commander that kind of has an engine built into it, but you have to do a lot of stuff to get the engine going, versus something like maybe Urza from Modern Horizons, where as long as you have a couple artifacts, your engine's good to go. I don't run this as a commander, but it's great in the 99. I've seen Joey Schultz play his version of this deck. I just think it's a really cool build for people who want to do tokeny things in Orzhov.
Yeah, I had the least down, having played Joey's deck. It's really, really good. And it's a lot of fun, and it's a deck you can interact with. The same thing with Omnath. Jason Alt has an Omnath deck I played twice last week on stream. But it's also relatively fair. Like, it never feels like it's like sometimes you get those really strong commanders that feel like you can't keep up with them. There's a cap on the deck too, to a degree. You can only do so much stuff with it for the most part because it cares about, like, it's counting the individual landfalls, and you can't stack one busted trigger really, really easily. So it's a good deck, but it's also one that, like, you can deal with. It feels like, okay, I have a chance as long as I play good Magic. I'm solid here. So I liked both of those. Calamax I liked a lot. It was really good. Sakashima isn't the most exciting commander, but, you know, if you're playing something that has a good ability, you can partner with it. Getting a second copy of that partner is almost always super, super useful. And Max mentioned Winota is just an absolute steamroller of a commander if built correctly. The one I picked, though, here is maybe a little boring, but it's Riel the Everwise. And I think the reason I like Riel is I think it's the commander that can do the most different things. If you want to build a really competitive deck where you're just digging down to find a combo piece as fast as you can and getting value along the way, you can do that. Matt Morgan has a relatively casual Riel deck that's just trying to, like, Voltron you out with big Riel beats, but it's super fun too. So, like, it's a completely different playstyle with that deck that's also totally viable. And if you're playing some kind of a wheels deck or a discard deck or something, it can go in the 99 of that deck as well. So kind of like Max mentioned with Thalisse, where it can go a lot of places besides just being a commander, I felt like Riel was the same thing. It was one of those commanders that you could build a lot of different ways as a commander, and you could just put it in a bunch of decks. It's just a good card in general, and I felt like all around, it's kind of the 5-tool star. If you talk about, like, baseball players that can do a little bit of everything, it's that kind of thing. It has abilities to do all the stuff you want to do without maybe being, like, the best at any one of them. So Riel the Everwise was my pick there for the best commander of 2021. So, any final thoughts here? It's obviously been a super weird year. Number one, it was the year of Commander where we got a ridiculous amount of product, and we couldn't play it in the traditional Commander setting. We couldn't do the thing with Jumpstart you're supposed to do for the most part because people couldn't play face-to-face. We couldn't really draft Commander Legends. Commander in general is a 4-player format or 3-player format or 5-player format, whatever, that became super difficult to do. If you're playing Standard and your roommate or significant other or whatever plays Standard, maybe you two could jam some games at home. That's much tougher when you need 3 or 4 people for Commander, however. So until webcam stuff kicked off, it was very difficult to enjoy a lot of these cards. So all of those things taken together, though, what are your thoughts here, Chris, on the cards we got in the state of Commander just in general in 2021?
I think it's amazing.
Sorry, 2020.
Well, it's going to be 2021, and hopefully the state will be back to normal.
Yes.
I think everything so far this year has been amazing. I like how they're kind of branching out with new theories, kind of like testing the waters to see, what people like. We got the MDFCs, they're putting out more cycles of different cards, and I mean, everything in general just seems like they're listening to what people are looking for, but not, going precisely down the line as to what people want, trying to keep it within reasonable boundaries.
How about you, Max? What are your thoughts here?
I definitely think 2020 was the year of Commander, whether the pandemic was happening or not. I think the difference between if this would have been no pandemic is I think product fatigue would have hit a little harder for me personally, because I would have always been at the LGS every week playing Commander, or, there on the weekends hanging out. So I would have seen the product on the regular, like every week. Where this year, because of the pandemic, I really only saw product because we were talking about it for the show, or ad tracking on my Instagram, a Magic ad showed up, or I happened to walk by them at Target or Walmart. So I did kind of forget about sets. Like I said last week, I didn't put any Zendikar Rising cards in my decks. Where Commander Legends, that was kind of like the icing on the birthday cake of the year of Commander was Commander Legends. And of course I bought tons of product like that and I love it. All that said, I hope we go, 3 or 4 years without another year of Commander. Just because there were a lot of cards that really impacted our format, whether they came from a standard set, a supplemental set like Jumpstart, or Commander Legends, or all the precons we got this year. It was a lot to consume and a lot to try to play around with, especially as someone who doesn't like to brew a new deck every 5 minutes. So it's really hard for me to be like, oh, I want to try all these cards, but what do I take out of my decks right now to make them work? Because I don't want to go through the process of building a new deck.
Sure. I think that is a perfectly reasonable way to feel about it. We got a ridiculous amount of product. Well, not only did we get a ridiculous amount of product, but they've also been juicing up existing products for Commander and putting in a lot more Legends as well. So kind of a double duty situation here where we got the year of Commander and got a bunch of products for Commander. And just in general, they've been souping up, things like even core sets to put more Commander product in there. So we just got a ton of stuff. Product fatigue absolutely was a thing. Some of that is me and all of us to a degree. Maybe just need to get better at mentally managing, like dealing with the FOMO effect and like not feeling you need to participate in all of it. Sometimes you can just be like this. I just need to take a set off or something. Maybe I need to work on doing that a little bit mentally too. Like I don't need to get the spreadsheet out for every single set. I don't think that's going to happen. I think I'll still do that. But to a degree, I think you just need to maybe take mental breaks a little bit more often too. Because they're just going to keep making product. I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. But I'm relatively happy with it. I think there were things I didn't love in 2019. I thought the Brawl decks were disbalanced. And I don't think cards like Tulane and Corvault in particular added much to the format that was positive. And we had gotten that run of commanders that I felt like were a little overpowered, whether it was Urza or, the Muldrothas of the world that are just so much value. But I feel like they've kind of gotten a grip on that. Not that they haven't made powerful stuff this year, but I feel like they've made powerful stuff that requires you to interact with it more for it to be powerful. Like you have to, be able to do things with your deck and play it for it to be super strong versus something like Tulane that just plays itself. So I think they've done a better job getting a handle on that, and it doesn't feel quite like the format is as much in, I don't know if danger is the right word, but at risk a little bit of them over-souping it up with cards designed to sell packs. So I feel like this year they've kind of got a hold on that and figured out the balance a little bit, and I'm hoping that continues moving forward. But all in all, I was very happy with 2020, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do in the year ahead. So we are not going anywhere, I don't think. I think we'll be around doing the same thing next year. So thanks to everyone who listens, and thanks to the two of you for being fantastic co-hosts and continuing to do this for hundreds of actual episodes. That's crazy.
Yes, well, thank you, Dana.
Yeah, thanks to both of you. This has been a blast, and I'm sure it will continue to be a blast as we go into 2021.
Absolutely. All right. If you out there in listener land want to say hi to us, you can find me at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max, and you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. You can also find our podcast editor, Rafael Garcia, at Ursa Bearwalker. And last but not least, our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. We will be back next week in 2021. Until then, I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Chris. Happy holidays, everybody.